whatever you may believe, but it comes internally. It is the governments of countries that are persecuting their own people. You look at Africa, the vast majority of conflicts on that continent are civil rather than international. And this brings us to a very tricky situation in terms of international law, because on the one hand, the international community is meant to butt out, not engage itself in these issues, because it's the sovereign affairs of other states, and only if the dealings of a government poses a threat to international peace and security, not internal, international peace and security, is it acceptable to intervene. And this is why you have Russia and China in particular on the Security Council of the United Nations generally oppose all and any interventions, because they say, well, it's a violation of state sovereignty, and frankly they couldn't give a crap about human rights, because they're worried about what precedent that might set for their own minorities in Chechnya, or the Tibet in the case of China, or the what do you call them?
Uyghurs.
Thank you, the Uyghurs, exactly. So we now have come to a situation where that conflict has become intolerable, and the international community in 2006, after much to and fro, did institute into law this so-called responsibility to protect, which holds that where a government, where there is large-scale killing or even ethnic cleansing, and the government of the country in which that killing is taking place is either unable or unwilling to prevent that from taking place, the international community doesn't have a right, has a responsibility to intervene to stop that from happening. And Libya was the first time where that doctrine was invoked under UN Security Council Resolution 1973 to protect Libyan civilians. And I'll finish on this. Well, was it legal then to advocate regime change? Well, as I say, under the responsibility to protect, if the regime is either unable or unwilling, then you've got to do something about it. By saying he's going to cleanse his country house by house, Colonel Gaddafi had shown himself pretty well to be unable, or at least unwilling. And given that the greatest threat to civilians, in fact I would say the exclusive threat to civilians, although in the aftermath we have seen really aberration, some reprisal killings from anti-Gaddafi militias that have to stop. But certainly in the run-up to the conflict, it was Gaddafi who was doing the killing, it was the regime that was posing the threat to civilians. So what do? Do you just impose a no-fly zone and sit there indefinitely? Or do you do something, do you go to source and do something about the cause and not just the symptom? And obviously that is what the international community decided to do. I think they were right to do so. Consequently, my conclusion is that this was a humanitarian intervention and not an aggression Griffin thing. It was in response to aggression. So there we are, and I'm happy to have your questions.
Thank you very much. So our floor is yours, guys. So if you have any questions, yeah.
Well, you mentioned that Obama seems to be anti-war. I mean, in terms of military spending, he's the most pro-war American president in living memory. He's sent more troops into Afghanistan. The withdrawal from Iraq has been basically a replacement of private contractors. His first act in office was to authorize the bombing of villages in Pakistan, which killed hundreds of civilians. And now he's starting, which is in American terms, an illegal and unconstitutional war without congressional approval in Libya, and which is grossly un-American.
Okay, well, on the legal thing, you can't have it both ways, because the Iraq war was voted for by Parliament and Congress, and everyone calls that illegal, because the UN didn't agree to it. Now, the UN did agree to this one, and Congress hasn't agreed to it. So, as I say, I don't take that it was illegal. I think what happened in Libya was very manifestly legal. The US president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He can take them overseas. When it comes to renewing his budget, then he needs Congress. But anyway, that is a different topic. In terms of him being a pro-war president, yes, isn't it ironic? Isn't it ironic that this man who came into office claiming to be all about no more interventions and so forth, has ended up intervening in all these places. And maybe that says something about the nature of international relations when you are the leader of the most powerful nation on earth. Perhaps it's not so straightforward as to just say, I declare peace, and I'm not going to intervene anywhere, any of the time. I think perhaps more than any single event, what summarises the difficulties of being in office for me, and as I say, I'm not saying that President Obama has pursued a good foreign policy. I think in many ways it's been not very good at all. But do you remember when he sat down and he said, within 12 months, I'm not going to cite this, I hope, close Guantanamo Bay. And Guantanamo, no, he didn't say I hope. No, this was one of the things he was going to change, right? Forget that hope. He was going to change it. Guantanamo Bay was going to be closed in 12 months.
We tried.
Yeah? I'm pretty sure he wanted to close it, and yet there it still is. So this is what I'm saying, is, I don't think it's just that these guys come to office and in fact they're nefarious, gung-ho, war-seeking villains. I think that they are confronted with realities when the memos land on their desk. It's not quite as straightforward as I thought it was.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to do something about it. So.
Yeah, I wanted to add something about intervention. I don't know if we can already say if it's legal or not, because so far it is legal. But maybe what we can hear is the future. We have to see if Western countries effectively have some interest. The most obvious one is oil, so I think that the situation right now, it has been pretty good in the intervention, even though there have been some blunders saying that NATO didn't do it on purpose and killed some civilians and all that. But I guess this happens in the context of war, so some problems of this kind can happen. But I think that we still cannot talk about very legal so far, and I think that Iraq intervention was, I think that the world was a little bit shocked by the Iraq intervention, so that's why they're hearing the same thing about Libya right now. And the other thing I want to add is the situation, I'm not talking about intervention right now, I'm just talking about the situation in the country by the citizens. I've been this summer for a long time in Tunisia, seeing what was going on, and because Gaddafi is dead does not mean that the country is safe. And of course in Tunisia it's even worse at the civilian level, because now there are some terrorist groups that are starting to go in houses and attack, and even people that I was talking about, she was like, oh yeah, yesterday I've been to a wedding and there are some people that came and they just want to kill us. I was like, oh wow. So I'm just thinking about Libya, this would happen, and especially because people, they have a lot of arms, and yeah.
No, I absolutely agree, and I don't think that this is the inevitable end of the conflict. Well, I think it's probably going to be the end of the conflict. Whether or not the reconstruction process will descend into chaos is a separate question. But certainly I don't think the conflict could have ended properly without Gaddafi being either captured or killed, because he was very much at the apex of this. But I just want to come on to this. I do not think it is an inevitability that Libya is going to go the way of Iraq or Afghanistan. I mean, there are significant, and obviously we can compare with Tunisia and Egypt, where there are massive problems. And there are always massive problems. I mean, there is probably no more difficult thing than to transition from an autocratic government to a democratic government in the space of, 12 months, which is what everyone's seeming to think is going to happen, particularly not when you're recovering from a war. But, does that mean that it was the wrong thing to do in the first place? And this is where I return to this point, that yes, there are now significant challenges ahead in Libya. We can talk about what those are. But the fact that, that there were inevitably going to be challenges, do you say, well, we're not going to do anything because there is the slightest possibility it might go wrong? I would put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that if we took that view as a species, we would still be in the Stone Age. So,
why do you think there hasn't been interventions in Syria or Bahrain?
I don't think there's been interventions in Syria because firstly, the Syrian people have said very clearly they don't want it. Secondly, the Security Council won't have it because China and Russia would veto it. They've even vetoed the resolutions that just seek to condemn the Syrian regime. Thirdly, there's probably not the resources necessary to do it. Fourthly, there's not the legitimacy to do it. Fifthly, in the case of Bahrain, the Saudis have pretty much vetoed it. And sixthly, we are not